Aloha and welcome. Today we have the pleasure of talking to you about Kupuna Care, and more specifically, what is the Kupuna Caucus, what role it plays here in Hawaii, and why you, either as a Kupuna or having family that are Kupunas, should care and should participate. I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to have this discussion with Representative Gregg Takayama. Aloha.
Thank you for inviting me, Leo. Thank you very much.
It's really a pleasure to do that. So could you please lead us in by giving us a little bit of an idea of your background?
Okay, sure. Well, this is my 5th year in the legislature. I'm just starting my 3rd term. And my background is I graduated from UH with a degree in journalism, worked at what some people might remember, the old Honolulu Star Bulletin. It was my first job. I then worked in Washington, D.C. for Senator Inouye for about 12 years, came back, ended up working for then Lieutenant Governor Kaitano, and then I started a new career as a TV reporter at KHON, Channel 2 News, where I worked for about 8 years, and then worked at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, as their communications director for a few years, and then decided to seek election to the State House. I'm from Pearl City. Through redistricting, they created a new district right in the middle of my community, and I thought, as one who was then in his late 50s, I thought someone with some life experience, with some experience in the field of government, as well as private industry, could bring some, I like to think of it as common sense approach to the legislature. So that's been my goal, to try and bring a common sense approach to government spending, and to government programs.
Excellent. And what is the district that you represent?
I represent District 34, which is Pearl City, Waimalu, and Momilani.
I see. So how did you get involved in the Kupuna Caucus?
Well, before I was elected to the State House, the House side of the Kupuna Caucus was led by a legislator named Marilyn Lee. Worked as a professional registered nurse for many years, in fact until she retired. But she had been an active member of Kupuna Caucus, but she was defeated for re-election at the same time I won the election, and I saw there was a vacuum that needed to be filled. So I volunteered to be the House chair of the Kupuna Caucus, and there I remain.
That's wonderful. Thank you for doing that.
Of course.
You also have some co-chairs on the Kupuna, and who are they?
My equivalent on the Senate side is Senator Leslie Hara.
Okay.
Now keep in mind that the Kupuna Caucus is no way limited in terms of which legislators participate or not. I mean, I'd be happy to welcome, as well as Senator Ihara, welcome many more legislators. And as a matter of fact, we do have regular visitors who are the chairs of our appropriate committees in social services, in health, and as need be, other House leaders and Senate leaders will appear at our caucuses as issues arise.
Well, and that's an excellent point to bring up, because one of the questions that I had is how well is the Kupuna Caucus supported by other members of the House and Senate and government overall?
Oh, well, first of all, let me backtrack a little bit by explaining what the Kupuna Caucus is.
Fine.
It's unlike many other caucuses at the legislature. We're not made up strictly of legislators. We're made up of stakeholders, that is, organizations like AARP, like Kokua Council, and others that have an interest in senior issues, as well as government agencies at both the city and state level that deal with senior services. So it's a wide range of stakeholders that are involved in the Kupuna Caucus. I guess one way of measuring the success and support of Kupuna Caucus is looking at our track record. When Kupuna Caucus was formed about 10 years ago, by the way, I might mention that Hawaii was the very first state to form a Kupuna Caucus like this. Of course, you wouldn't call it a Kupuna Caucus in any other state, but the concept has been very well received among other states who have the same interests in senior services and stakeholding as we do. And so we're a pioneer in this effort. Look at the track record of major legislation that Kupuna Caucus has supported, and I'd say we've done fairly well.
I looked at the May meeting. At that point, you reviewed the legislative progress that was being made. Where do you go to find the Kupuna Caucus archived?
Olelo has done a great job of taping our Kupuna Caucus meetings, and they do have an archive of tapes that I think you accessed, and you can find them available. Also on the State of Hawaii legislative website, if you look under caucuses, you can click on the different caucuses. Kupuna Caucus is one of those that has an active slate of bills, and if you click on it, it'll tell you which bills have been introduced by Kupuna Caucus and which have been, what their status is.
Okay. What is the Kupuna Caucus? What is its mission? What is its objective?
Well, the Kupuna Caucus is actively involved in advancing issues that are important to seniors. Important to remember that the lifespan in Hawaii is the longest in the United States, and one of actually the longest in the world. Our average lifespan in Hawaii is well into the 80s. And so what that means is that our population of seniors is constantly growing. In about 10 to 15 years, fully 1/3 of our population will be over the age of 60. And so what that means is that if you're not a kupuna yourself over the age of 60, chances are good that someone in your household will be one. And the number of multi-generation households we have in Hawaii is one of the highest in the country. And the reason is pretty simple. I mean, you look at the cost of housing and how difficult it is for children like my daughters to be able to afford a house. They end up either moving to the mainland or staying home with mom and dad. And so it's not unusual to have 3-4 generations living in the same household. What that means in terms of, for example, caregiving, is that we have a large number of caregivers. And caregiving is, as far as family caregiving, can be anything from babysitting, if you're a grandparent, babysitting your grandchildren, and in some cases, grandchildren babysitting grandparents. But caregiving can range from anything from just keeping an eye on somebody who's watching TV or cooking meals to being really intensive caregiving in terms of medication and support.
Yeah, the other thing that it comes down to is the cost of living is so high here that in family household, you and your spouse both have to work. And then on top of that, if you have to be a family caregiver, there's some tough decisions that need to be made.
Definitely.
In terms of how to accomplish that. And so at the last meeting, I heard you say that a bill was recently signed by the governor to provide some potential support to those that find themselves in that kind of position. Could you describe what that bill is and what it's intended to do?
The bill that was enacted into law after Governor Ige signed it provides support to family caregivers.
That means actual dollars support?
Yes. The bill provides $600,000 in the first year to set up a program where family caregivers would be eligible to receive a stipend of $70 a day. The idea behind it is to provide some kind of respite for family caregivers in need. These are usually middle-aged women who have a full-time job but end up caring for a parent or an in-law. Unfair or not, it usually falls to women. And that's just the way it is in our society. So the idea behind this new law is to set up a system where those in need can tap into this $70 a day, and that maybe gives them a day or so where they can try and keep their full-time jobs. We don't want them to lose their jobs while they're being a caregiver. It takes a little bit of the burden off. You know, the whole idea of long-term care services for the elderly in Hawaii is a long one. I mean, we've wrestled with this idea for decades now. About 7 years ago, the legislature actually passed a bill to provide long-term care, to set up a whole structure of long-term care.
Really?
Set up a payroll tax of $10 a month for every person who's working in Hawaii. Put it into this long-term care fund, and people could tap into it when they needed long-term care. Unfortunately, Governor Lingle vetoed the bill in 2010, and it's never resurfaced in that form. What happened in the last several years was an attempt to fund long-term care at the state level by increasing the general excise tax. So that failed as recently as last year. And what happened was, of course, because the people on Oahu are paying an extra GET surcharge to fund the Honolulu Rail project, there was a strong resistance to adding on another GET surcharge for long-term care.
Wow.
So this approach that I just described simply appropriates funds out of the state general fund. $600,000 this first year. We, in the next session, hope to increase it to $6 million and actually get this program on its feet.
A little more detail. The $70, what are the eligibility elements that are involved with that?
Well, the task now at the Governor's Office of Elderly Affairs is to set up an actual policy structure to determine who's eligible for these funds and what kind of programs would be eligible to be paid for. What we're thinking of at the legislative level are, for example, enrolling in adult daycare services,
Okay.
transportation services to take the person who's being cared for to their medical doctor's appointments, checkups, exercise class, that sort of thing. And basically take the burden off the caregiver to do all of this.
So, that bill was successful. How did it grow from community awareness that something had to be done in this area into actual legislation and into success?
Well, that's where the Kupuna Caucus comes in.
Great.
And that's where, it was actively discussed among stakeholders. The need for long-term care, decades old. I mean, it's been discussed at the state level for many years. What happened was after last session, when it became clear that increasing the general excise tax was not the route to go, it was not going to pass the legislature, Senator Ross Baker from Maui, who's the chair in the Senate of the Consumer and Health Committee, tried to come up with an idea that would develop partial solution
yeah.
to the need. And that's where this idea of tapping into the state general fund came up, and it was supported by House and Senate leadership, which is why we were able to pass the legislature without a single dissenting vote.
Wow.
Without a single dissenting vote at either the committee or the full House and Senate level. And the governor gladly signed it into law. It had strong support, and this is one case where the Kupuna Caucus stakeholders, Caring Across Generations, for example, is a national group with an active presence in Hawaii. AARP, Kokua Council, all these other groups had a strong participation in legislative hearings that heard the bill and strongly supported it. What I like to say is that when we introduce a bill in the House and Senate, it provides a canvas that the testifiers, the supporters, fill in with their own versions of the story,
Yes.
with their own life stories, with their own stories of participating as caregivers. And that's what really propels the bill and how they were able to succeed.
That's what your co-chair brought up was at the last meeting, when somebody said, would the legislature consider this? I remember him saying, got to raise community awareness.
Absolutely.
And you got to be able to make sure that then that translates into awareness at the legislative level that something needs to be done.
Oh, yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit? I found that statement is very enticing to consider.
Yeah, Senator Ihara, I think, was spot on when he made that observation, because there is no shortage of good ideas at the legislature. 3,000 bills get introduced every year.
3,000.
3,000 bills get introduced every year, and in the legislature, and about 300 get passed into law. So your chances of actually getting something enacted are probably a little less than 10%,
Wow.
if that. So a lot of good ideas fall by the wayside for lack of support, for lack of understanding, for lack of community awareness. And so that's where having a number of senior groups, senior advocates coming forward, first of all, to be aware of what the possible solutions are, and number two, to mobilize support.
Mobilize support, yeah.
And community support translates into legislative support generally. Because legislators know that if they respond to community concerns, they increase their chances of returning to the legislature every 2 or 4 years. And seniors, I'll be honest, seniors are the most consistent voters. You look at the voter statistics, both in Hawaii and nationally, as to who are the most consistent voters. And it starts with the seniors, and then the least consistent voters are the younger generations.
Interesting. So now as we look forward, the 2017 legislation is completed, what kind of things do you think are going to be part of the focus and objectives and mission of the
Yeah.
Kupuna Caucus?
Well, like I mentioned, the Kupuna Caregivers Program is now in its first year.
Right.
$600,000 appropriated. The Office on Elderly Affairs generates a policy, and ideally we follow it up next year with more funding
Okay,
to
so-
actually flesh out the program. Like I said, we're hoping for $6 million, but money is tight. That's why it's so unusual for any new programs to get started, especially programs that provide services like this Kupuna Caregivers Program does, which is why Kupuna Caucus is so proud of what we were able to
Absolutely.
accomplish. Another bill that passed this past session that the governor signed, the same day he signed the Kupuna Caregivers Bill, it's called Healthy Opportunities for Seniors. In other words, the state funds exercise classes, wellness classes for seniors. And it does so through the county level. They
Okay.
fund activities at the county parks, at churches, at community centers. And the idea behind this is for seniors to have the opportunity to participate in exercise classes, Tai Chi, healthy eating, healthy activities that keep their minds active as well as their body. And this program received $500,000
This year, yeah.
this year. Last year and the year before, unfortunately, it fell by the wayside and did not receive any funding. So we're more than excited that this program has been revived. And what's about it is not just the idea that we're keeping seniors active, but the idea that we may, in the long run, end up decreasing our health costs.
Oh, okay.
One of the biggest causes of death for seniors and disability is falls. And how do you prevent falls? Number one, by exercise, by keeping elders alert mentally and physically. And we, in the long run, could save a huge amount of money by avoiding falls that very often in seniors end up walking again.
Sure.
Or ended up being permanently disabled or even dying.
Yes.
And so that's a basic cost that we could avoid. In addition, it enables seniors to age in place at home. The vast majority of seniors don't want to go into a nursing home. They want to stay where they are in their home, hopefully aging together with their spouse and not having to move to someplace that they're unfamiliar with. Well, the third major one is a program called Kupuna Care. Kupuna Care is a state program that's funded every year, and it channels state funds in an amount of about $9 million every year to programs at the county level that enable seniors to, as I said, age in place. These are seniors who probably earn a little bit too much in terms of income, retirement income, to qualify for Medicaid, but still have their own home, want to live in place, want to age in place, but maybe need a little support from the state, whether it means delivered meals, whether it means transportation via handy van to get to doctor's appointments or exercise classes, need that sort of thing to be able to live on their own. And so that's what Kupuna Care does.
I see. Okay.
And so we were able to fund it to the tune of a little over $9 million this year, which is generally the amount it needs to sustain itself. And so that's a third success that we can point to this year.
How do you think we're doing in terms of getting to a point where we can adequately support our Kupunas and their families? And how does the programs that we have compare with those nationally?
In terms of setting up state-sponsored programs, I think we're among the pioneers. Like I said, the Kupuna Caregivers Program, first in the country to be enacted, to provide a stipend to caregivers. Kupuna Care, in a different form, has been enacted by a number of other states to provide support for seniors who want to live in place at home. I'd say Hawaii has been in the forefront of many of these programs, thanks in large part to recently retired Senator Susie Chan Oakland, who was, an active and a leader of the Kupuna Caucus for many years, as well as chair of the Senate Committee on Human Services. So she was one of the generators of the concept behind setting up a Kupuna Caucus. And so a huge amount of debt is owed to Senator Chan Oakland, along with former Representative Dennis Arakaki, who, along with Senator John Oakland set up the Kupuna Caucus in the first place more than 10 years ago.
Wow. I listed a whole bunch of issues that kind of strike me as areas where action is may or may not be necessary. Of course, it's healthcare costs, disease, physical assistance, providing for financial security, dealing with loneliness, dealing with financial predators that take advantage of elders,
Exactly.
abuse or neglect of our kupunas, the issue of transportation, keeping up with technology. How many of us
Yeah.
are capable of?
Absolutely. More than you'd expect, actually. Seniors tend out to be very literate in terms of computer use. But I meant, stop you just a minute
Sure.
and talk about financial abuse,
Okay.
financial exploitation of seniors, because that's been another hot topic among Kupuna Caucus. Among the participants in Kupuna Caucus are members of the Attorney General's office, as well as the prosecutor's office, that are involved in exploitation of seniors. And so among the other achievements at the state level, we've been able to enact laws, for example, that increase the penalties for those who try and pull financial scams on seniors. For example, unlicensed contractors. Every neighborhood has them where they walk door to door. They're unlicensed. They promise everything in terms of home repairs or home improvements, and in some cases, unfortunately, end up walking away with the money. If the victims are seniors, we increase the penalties for those who try and take advantage of seniors. There are other cases of caregivers who financially exploit seniors by tapping into their savings account, by tapping into their checking accounts. We've increased the penalties for those scammers as well. And so we've done our best to try and protect seniors from those who would take advantage of them, not just physically, but also financially. And so I think, knock on wood, that we've been able to avoid the worst kind of abuse that have occurred, unfortunately, in the past, and hopefully we've been able to avoid some of that happening in the future. About, I think it was 2 years ago that we passed a law for a financial institution that suspects a senior of being taken advantage of. For example, if a senior walks in with someone who claims to have the power of attorney, but yet it seems somewhat suspicious, seniors taking out, for example, all of their life savings and want it in the form of a cashier's check. Well, we passed a law that requires the financial institution to alert police.
Yes,
Requires them.
that's
And
fantastic.
so it takes the burden off the bank of, maybe being sued for
Privacy
not,
issues.
for
Yeah.
privacy concerns. So we'll
Yeah.
take the burden out of the bank's hands and puts it in law that says they are required to report it to the law enforcement agencies.
That's fantastic.
And like I said, it's aimed at trying to prevent financial exploitation of seniors.
Yeah, and the reason I went over this list, and there's even more, when you look at all of these potential topics, what's the process that goes through your mind in terms of which ones are the ones to try to deal with within the caucus, which ones are just not going to get there for one reason or another?
Some are easier to deal with than others. I think in terms of criminal enforcement, because there is such a widespread concern about protecting our seniors and protecting their nest eggs, those are fairly easy to pass, to tell you quite frankly, because there's no opposition. The ones that are difficult to pass are the ones that require an outlay of money.
Of money.
Because, there are competing interests for every dollar that is in the state coffers. Schools are important. Human services are important. Elderly services are just one of the ones that we deal with. We also deal with homelessness, poverty, the need for affordable housing. So there are a vast amount of competing needs. And so when it comes to spending money, we need to make a very good case that the dollars that we appropriate for senior programs are, number one, needed, and number two, are going to be spent wisely and in the interests of our society as a whole.
Well, I attended the last meeting and listened to the discussion from the organizations with regards to dementia and Alzheimer's, and in so many areas here on the islands, the number of volunteers who advocate and who are activists in these different areas is just astounding.
Oh, yeah.
And I think what your caucus allows all that energy and all that productivity to come together and be heard and facilitates the process, how to bring this forward to what it actually comes down to, and it's funding.
No, sharing of information at the Kupuna Caucus is vital to our success. You mentioned Alzheimer's Association. That's a terrific organization that has mobilized the community, spread awareness. You know, my own dad passed away after suffering from dementia. So my brother and I know what it's like to deal as caregivers with someone who's suffering dementia, and it's difficult. And this was about 10 years ago. And at the time, you know, the most difficult thing was perhaps knowing where to turn to, and knowing that you're not the only family that's suffering from a case of dementia. Which agencies are available for help? Which services are available, and how do you tap into them? How do you find a good nursing home that'll take care of your loved one in a secure and supportive setting? All of those things have been made much easier to deal with through the activities of Alzheimer's Association as well as state government. And so we owe a great deal to the volunteers that are involved in organizations like Alzheimer's. One of the needs, talking about needs, that are still on our agenda wish list is the need for a statewide Alzheimer's/dementia coordinator at the state level. Someone in the Office of Aging in the Department of Health who can perhaps bring all of this information together, make sure that it's disseminated. Because here on Oahu, we have access to lots of information, not so much on the neighbor islands and not so much in rural communities.
That's true.
So we need someone at the state level who can coordinate all of these activities, make sure it's pushed out to the general public. That's been on our wish list, and we still hope to have a state coordinator appointed for dementia and Alzheimer's.
Any thoughts on family planning?
Long-term family planning is huge. You know, if everyone had a long-term care insurance plan, it'd be great. It wouldn't be as much of a problem as it is now. But the fact is, very few people actually think ahead and purchase long-term care insurance. By the time it becomes a top-of-mind issue, people tend to be well into their middle ages, approaching long-term care, which is when healthcare insurance is its most expensive, which is logically follows. So the best time to purchase a program like that financially is when you're in your earlier years, when you're perhaps just starting out in a career. But that's, of course, when you least expect to need it. We've not been able to enact, because of the cost, a full-scale statewide program of long-term care insurance. We tried, as I said, in 2010 at the legislative level, but it was vetoed by Governor Lingo. So this latest approach is our latest effort to try and deal with it in at least a small scale by assisting family caregivers to a small extent.
Kupuna Caucus, when does it meet? How often is it? What are some of the topics?
Kupuna Caucus meets first Friday of every month at 1:30 in the afternoon, somewhere in a conference room at the state capitol. So our next meeting will be August, and we're leading into the start of the next session. So what we're developing now are ideas for new legislation that can be considered by the 2018 legislature.
Okay.
If you are able to attend or watch on Olelo, the Kupuna Caucus meetings in the next few months will be focused on possible ideas for legislation.
Well, you just said a key thing. The caucus meetings are open to the public.
Totally. We encourage anyone to come to our Kupuna Caucus meetings, 1:30, first Friday of every month.
Do they need to pre-register or just show
No.
up?
Walk in, if you sign in our email sheet, you'll be put on our email list, and you'll know whatever activities or handouts or whatever else information is available, you'll get. And I just might mention that someone who is really in need of more information, call my office, 586-6340. That's 586-6340 for more information about Kupuna Caucus or any of the bills we just discussed.
Well, thank you ever so much for this wonderful opportunity. I think it's been incredibly informative, fully educational, and let's take it forward and provide for our Kupunas.
Thank you, Leo. I enjoyed it very much.